Hi, everybody. It's great to see you all today. So I'm going to continue my discussion of the evolution of academic freedom. And last class, I focused on the origins of academic freedom, right? It's a concept that has a history. It didn't exist in the Middle Ages. It began in 1810 at the University of Berlin, and it was partially actualized, but it was more of an ideal. So the Germans, Wilhelm von Humboldt is the great theorist who came up with the notion of Lehrfreiheit, but his replacement at the University of Berlin didn't really fully commit to it. But the idea sort of captured the imagination of Americans. And in the early 20th century, Americans refined the idea, and we're still working within their framework. And yet the framework is under attack. So, what I wanted to do with these lectures is do the history to figure out which ideas from the past we could reconstruct for our current moment. So let's just talk a little bit about what the current moment is. One thing is there's just the erosion of tenure. So in 1985, about two-thirds of faculty had tenure or were tenure track. So the norm was if you were an academic, community college or public state university or private university, that you were going to become either tenure or tenure track. And there's also the expectation that if you were out of school for a long time, you would be given things like tenure. The 1940 statement of the AAUP said if you're out of school for longer than 7 years, you should really be treated like you have tenure. But what you can just see right now by this graph is that only about 24% of current faculty are tenured and about 9% in this 2020, but 9% are tenure track. So about one third of faculty is tenured. So one of the great ways to protect academic freedom is tenure, and yet it's becoming more and more a privilege of people at very good schools. And so we have to think, do we really want to defend tenure? And for me, clearly the answer is yes. So we've got the structural dynamics, but then we also have the powerful people firing unruly faculty. So last lecture, I discussed Maura Finkelstein. As it turns out, I'm friends with this other professor at Drexel, Geomar, and he did a tweet, which if you had asked me, I wouldn't have tweeted it, but he tweeted it and his extramural political speech, a little bit inflammatory. The alumni mobilized. They were really upset about it. They put pressure on him. So he didn't technically get fired. He retired, like he resigned, but effectively was fired. And so one thing that Geo said is tenure is a crucial buffer against those who would use money to dictate the content of higher education. But in a neoliberal academy, such protections are far from absolute. So I agree with Geo, but I'm just going to slightly tweak it. We could focus on the neoliberal academy, but one of the things that I did last lecture, I discussed the opening pages of Plato's Republic, and you see this contrast between Socrates, the philosopher, and Cephalus, the wealthy guy. And the dialogue takes place because the wealthy person leaves. And if the wealthy person didn't leave, then we wouldn't have had Plato's Republic. So the contrast between philosophers and the wealthy goes back to just about the history of Western political philosophy. So it's a perennial issue. It's not brand new with neoliberal economy, although there's certainly aspects of the dynamic that are new and that are worth considering. So the plan for today's lecture, I want to say a little bit about alt liberal arts, who invited me. Thank you. I want to talk about the situation in the 19th and early 20th century that led to the AAUP 1915 Declaration. So that's a really important document in the history of academic freedom. And what it did is that it identified roles for the trustees, for academics, for universities, and for academic freedom. And last lecture, you can watch this lecture, not have watched that one, but they're a continuation, right? Because my argument is that the 1915 authors at the AAUP, including particularly John Dewey, they all read Plato. I mean, Wilhelm von Humboldt, John Dewey, all these people read Plato. So they were thinking in Platonic terms, and really academic freedom is trying to figure out how do you make sure that Socrates doesn't get killed by the city or doesn't get crushed by Cephalus. I have a question for you that it's a legit open question for me I'm struggling with. I think I know an answer, but it's a hard one. And I think it's a hard one for everybody who studies academic freedom. And then I'm really honored to have a conversation with Stephen Miles. He started, I discovered he started at New College a little bit before me, but he had his whole career, very successful career at New College. And he's just a perfect discussion partner. So I look forward to our discussion at the end. And there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions. There'll be the Q&A function at the bottom. So if you have a question, please put it in and we'll try to answer it. Alt Liberal Arts is a global education initiative concerned with academic freedom and civic engagement in the liberal arts. In collaboration with Bard College and the Open Society University Network, Alt Liberal Arts offers free global online lectures and courses for which you can register at altliberalarts.org. And I would like to thank Mary, Mila, Kimbu, Stephen, Pat, everybody who's participating, everybody who's watching. It's a real privilege to be able to discuss these topics with you all. So let's go back to the late 19th, early 20th century. What sort of just, if you ask me, it's a miracle of combinations, right? That if you study the Enlightenment, all of these great philosophers of the Enlightenment, Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Baruch Spinoza, like they couldn't have families and they all had to sort of scrape and get jobs from powerful people. And they didn't have like institutional protections. I mean, Kant is the first major philosopher in the West who had a job at a university, which is kind of incredible. Maybe Aquinas if you're going back to the Middle Ages. But so in the late 19th, early 20th century, you have philanthropists who are founding universities. And some of these are household names. It's Johns Hopkins, it's Vanderbilt. It's people don't realize that the University of Chicago was really a product of the wealth of John D. Rockefeller, who I've read was the wealthiest person in the world in his lifetime, right? If he was alive right now, he would be in the money transfer, like he'd be by far the wealthiest person. So just incredible good luck that these super wealthy people decided to found universities. And then what's even more amazing is that they hired people to design the universities who had studied at German research universities, which again just blows your mind if you have any sort of historical perspective, right? So Johns Hopkins, I mean, he was made his money with railroads like the Baltimore Ohio Railroad, and and at one point Baltimore was the fifth biggest city in the United States, and he didn't get married or have children, and sort of at the end of his life, half of his fortune went to Johns Hopkins Hospital, where I met my wife, and half of it went to Johns Hopkins University, and he entrusted Daniel Coit Gilman to found it, who had studied in Germany, or he didn't actually go to school in Germany, but he had gone to Germany after graduating from Yale. At the end of the 19th century, nearly 10,000 Americans had studied in Germany, including W.E.B. Du Bois. And at least 45 university presidents can be traced to the universities of Leipzig and Göttingen alone. This is from a quote from Emily Levine, Allies and Rivals, German-American Exchange and the Rise of the Modern Research University. It's one of the key books I'm relying on. It's a really fantastic book. But at the end of the 19th century, there's no institutional protection for academic freedom. And just one example is Charles Sanders Peirce, who lived from 1839 to 1914. He's the philosopher who William James say invented pragmatism. I just read an article in Eon magazine that called him the greatest American thinker ever. And what happened was that he was in a hotel with a woman who was not his wife. A trustee of Johns Hopkins University heard about this and wanted him fired, and he was fired from Johns Hopkins in 1884. I mean, think about it. It's the greatest, maybe the greatest philosopher in American history. There's debates, of course, but he was fired for something that's not that uncommon nowadays. And he published 12,000 pages. I mean, he just published all sorts of topics. There's an article that he had left behind 100,000 handwritten pages that were unpublished, right? He was a master of logic and did all sorts of innovations in logic and took notes, and just incredibly sad to think about one of the, it's sad if anybody dies poor and lonely, but one of America's greatest philosophers basically could not get protection from a trustee who was upset with them. So that's what happens when you don't have academic freedom. One other example that's in the history books Emily Levine talks a lot about is Edward Ellsworth Ross. He was an economist trained at Johns Hopkins. He went to work at Stanford University. He was a critic of the railroads, and that's where the Stanfords made their money. And so Ross had this line, a railroad deal is a railroad steal, which is my own view is probably correct, right? I mean, nice people don't build railroads, right? You have to. And Ross was said some things about Asian Americans that you couldn't say nowadays. He probably shouldn't have said at his own time. Jane Stanford, the sole trustee, said Professor Ross cannot be trusted and he should go. He's a dangerous man. David Starr Jordan, Stanford's president, said, we cannot bring good men here if they believe their positions are insecure. So he tried to protect Ross. Ross ended up going to the University of Wisconsin, had a very successful career. But this scandal led to the creation of the American Association of University Professors, AAUP, which was, they had an early meeting in 1913, but in 1915, they really congealed together as an organization. So the document they published in 1915 is the 1915 Declaration of Principles on Academic Freedom and Academic Tenure. And so the very first line of this document is referring in German to Lehrfreiheit and Lernfreiheit. So there's a direct link between the German philosophers and the American pragmatists. So John Dewey, who's in the center there, right, he's taking up, along with some other key figures, Edward Seligman and Arthur Lovejoy. So they're bringing these ideas to the United States. Why is this document important? It's because it really explains academic freedom and justifies academic freedom. Now, most universities have adopted the 1940 statement on academic freedom and tenure. And the 1940 statement is like 3 or 4 pages, and a lot of it is footnotes. So in the 1960s and up till 1970, they added these footnotes. So it's about 4 pages, 2 pages double-sided. It's very short. The 1915 document is much more philosophical, right? Dewey loved philosophy. He nearly everything he wrote was the same length as long as it takes to deliver a lecture. So the 1915 document is a much more philosophical document. Richard Rorty, an American pragmatist, said, you don't need philosophical presuppositions for academic freedom. In fact, it'd probably be better if you don't try to argue for it. As long as everybody accepts academic freedom, stop arguing for it, right? People see the advantages of universities. They want to send their kids there. Don't muddy the waters by trying to make philosophical arguments that people won't agree on. It's not worth it. So that's Richard Rorty's position. David Raban, who just published a book with Harvard University Press and was the lawyer for the AAUP, said academic freedom is really a subset of First Amendment, and it's a subset of First Amendment jurisprudence. And so it shouldn't be a philosophical issue, right? If a professor is about to be fired and they go to court, they can't argue philosophy. They can argue First Amendment. So David Raban his book was called Academic Freedom. Early in the book, he's like, why are we even talking about philosophy, right? But here's my thesis, is that we still need to convince trustees and the public to fund higher education model that protects academic freedom, right? You could have an academic model where the trustees or the president could fire faculty at will, where the faculty would be at will employees. There are certain politicians today who still want that, right? They still want to fire faculty who say things that bother them, right? But so we need to convince these legislators not only not to fire the faculty, but we need to convince them that you want to create an education system that creates room for these pains in the butt, right? You need to convince people that, listen, if you create academic freedom, here's the price. You're going to get a lot of benefits. You're going to get, a great university. People are going to want to study there. But here's the problem you're going to face is that some of these academics are going to criticize you. And you shouldn't try to hide that. You should, in fact, lean into it, right? You want to say you want to go to you want a university town that attracts controversial speakers. That means you're doing it right. So this document does 3 things that I want to focus on. It talks about the role of the trustees, which is to support academics. The role of academics is to seek truth and protect the public interest. And the function of the university is to advance knowledge, teach students, develop experts, and all of these things require academic freedom. So what I want to do is I want to go through the different planks of this argument, and then at the end, I really want to think about how we can make this argument relevant today. So the role of the trustees is that the American institutions of learning are usually controlled by boards of trustees as the ultimate repositories of power. It is a prerequisite to a realization of the proper measures of academic freedom in American institutions of learning that all boards of trustees should understand the full implications of the distinction between private proprietorship and a public trust. So here's the first step is that you need trustees. You can't have a university without trustees. I mean, there's a small college in North Carolina called the Black Mountain College, a sort of a very famous experimental college. It's where the Bauhaus came to, the architecture came to America. John Cage went there. John Dewey visited there. New college faculty sort of retired near there, but they didn't have traditional trustees. So if you don't have trustees who are rich, it's going to be hard to keep the lights on. And so the document is saying, yes, we need trustees, but we need them to know that academics serve the public. So academics are not employees who sort of report to the trustees, is that the arrangement is that the trustees create this institution, but the academics themselves serve the public, pursue truth. You're not allowed to just fire them. The role of academics. The academics' function is to deal at first hand after prolonged and specialized technical training with the sources of knowledge and then to impart the results of their own and of their fellow specialists' investigations and reflection, both to students and to the general public without fear or favor. So if you're going to have academics, you have to let them go where the truth leads them, or else you're not doing it right, right? I mean, academia, there's Stephen Miles shared with me this essay by Hannah Arendt saying, it's going to be a wavy line between Plato's Academy and the current academy, but there's a connection. And so the connection is that you got to create a place where people can pursue truth. Here's the easy case, like a place at the University of Wisconsin. University of Wisconsin brags that they have the Wisconsin model, and the Wisconsin model is supposedly that all the knowledge is going to benefit the people of Wisconsin. And so an easy case is something like the Babcock butterfat test. So that's the famous example of the Wisconsin model that a chemistry professor there was able to figure out how to measure the fat content of milk, and that makes it easier to sell milk and to buy milk and to process milk. So just instant payoff. University sort of benefits the farmers of Wisconsin. That's an easy case. The harder case is something like Columbia University psychologist James McKeen Cattell, that pretty much in World War I and right after America entered, all the academics lined up to support World War I. Even John Dewey did. He sort of felt embarrassed about it. In 1919, he went to China for 2 years, and I think part of his reason he just wanted to sort of get out of the limelight because he realized he had sort of been duped by propaganda. But one person who had not been duped by propaganda was Cattell, and Nicholas Murray Butler, the president of Columbia, was like, "We're going to support the war effort. We're going to make the world safe for democracy." So they fired James McKeen Cattell. So what I think this document is trying to do is saying, listen, you have to protect the academics when they're in the easy case and the hard case. And that's tenure is always going to be put to the test. That's kind of my working thesis, that there's never been a golden age of tenure. There's always been some sort of McCarthy era. I mean, we give McCarthy because that seems to have raised to a certain bar. But I mean, if you just have any sort of historical awareness, there's never been a period where academics were entirely safe. It was either the Red Scare or the Vietnam War or something, right? There's always an occasion for philosophers broadly conceived to antagonize powerful people. The role of universities, look at a picture of Columbia, is to promote inquiry and the advancement of human knowledge, to promote general instruction to students, right? That's part of the sales pitch, right? You're trying to convince Cephalus that his son Polemarchus will get a good education with philosophers. So, the AAUP is saying, listen, tuition paying families. You want your professors to be fearless seekers of truth and bring your kids to the forefronts of human knowledge. So you're going to have to pay a little bit extra to make sure that there are journals and libraries and laboratories and museums and field trips and sabbaticals and all those expensive things to make sure that your kids are studying with the smartest people in the world. To develop experts for public service, this is progressive era document. In all domains of knowledge, the first condition of progress is complete and unlimited freedom to pursue inquiry and publish its results. Such freedom is the breath in the nostrils of all scientific activity. So here's the deal that if you want the benefits of a research university, if you want a Columbia University, a Harvard, a University of Florida, a Fordham University, choose your school. If you want a liberal arts college with professors who have studied at these research universities and who are training young people to maybe get their advanced degrees or not, right? You don't have to necessarily go on to your advanced degrees to continue your education, but if you want all of the benefits that come from this higher education ecosystem, you have to realize that freedom is the air that everybody breathes. So, if you want all the good things, you're going to have to allow there to be freedom. An interesting line, it should be an intellectual experiment station where new ideas may germinate and where their fruit, though still distasteful to the community as a whole, may be allowed to ripen until finally, perchance, it may become a part of the accepted intellectual food of the nation or of the world. So, this is the part of the 1915 declaration that the 1940 statement drops, right? Because they don't want to keep arguing about these things, right? They just want it to be accepted that you have academic freedom. But in 1915, you still have to argue, and what you have to say is, even if the professors or the philosophers broadly considered any academic discipline can sort of have a philosophical spirit, if you allow academics freedom, they're going to say things you dislike, probably, right? They're going to have a gadfly. They're going to have somebody who says something that bothers other people. And my examples that I've been using in these lectures are Maura Finkelstein and Geo Mayer. 'Cause they're my friends. They're my age. They're a little younger than me, but the fact is that this goes back to the beginning of the history of the academy in Plato's era. So that's just the deal, that if you're going to have intellectual freedom, you're going to have people saying distasteful things. So academia protects philosophers in whatever department. That's the deal. Here's the catch. The claim to freedom of teaching is made in the interest of the integrity and of the progress of scientific inquiry. It is therefore only those who carry on their work in the temper of the scientific inquirer who may justly assert this claim. The liberty of the scholar within the university to set forth his conclusions, be they what they may, is conditioned by their being conclusions gained by a scholar's method and held in a scholar's spirit. That is to say, they must be the fruits of competent and patient and sincere inquiry, and they should be set forth with dignity, courtesy, and temperateness of language. So the fact is that if you work at a private company and you say something inappropriate on social media and you embarrass the company, they can fire you, right? It's First Amendment's about Congress, but there's nothing in that about private companies, right? So if you work for Apple Computer and you go on social media and badmouth Apple, there's a pretty good chance that they could fire you. Maybe they have internal due process things, or maybe not. Maybe they just fire you, right? The deal with academic freedom is that you're allowed to say these controversial things in public and you can't get fired. I mean, it really is about employment protection. Okay, so what do you have to do to deserve those protections? Well, according to this statement, you have to use a scholar's method and do a scholar's spirit, right? So I can't tell you how many times I've been on social media and I've wanted to tweet something and just put somebody in their place. And I just said, Tampio, don't do it. Like, it's not worth it. Like, you've got a reputation. People are going to associate your name with Fordham. Like, it might feel good to let this person know what's up, but you're going to destroy your reputation. And the fact of the matter is that the people who have been fired with tenure in recent years have kind of gone up to that limit of being inappropriate in public. So it's just better to not do very much on social media that could get you in trouble, right? I used to be much more active on Twitter than I am now, or X, because like it's just too easy to say the wrong thing and then regret it. So here's the question I want to ask you that we'll come back to is, what do you think? Do you think academic freedom should only protect people who speak with dignity, courtesy, and temperateness of language? Do you think that's a reasonable demand, or do you think that's a problem? So, on the one hand, the document makes it hard for trustees to fire professors. That's the importance of the document. That's why it's just a key document in the history of American education. Other university systems around the world have adopted versions of it. I mean, America, we have by far the sort of the most expansive First Amendment rights. I would say pretty much we have the most expansive academic freedom rights. So it's hard to fire professors. But on the other hand, the document enjoins academics to exercise academic freedom responsibly, right? It's saying that, if you want this protection because you're a scholar, well, you need to be a scholar. You can't be cursing people out. You can't be making personal attacks. Ideally, you want to be providing evidence. You want to be sort of be ready to respond if somebody makes a careful critique of you, right? All of the things that you're expected to do when you're a scholar. That's what Dewey is saying, and the AAUP is saying, is that you want the benefits, you got to sort of play responsibly. But here's why it's an open question for me is that, you know, Socrates, he had famous students, but the most famous is Plato. But one of his other students, other lineage of the Socratic tradition is Diogenes. And Diogenes is the cynic, right? You can always see pictures of him with dogs. I think that's what cynic means, or cynic. And, it's basically Diogenes was very rude to Alexander the Great. The Great came to visit him, and then Diogenes famously told him, get out of this, get out of the way. You're blocking the sunlight. So the thing is that like part of philosophy is being rude, being inconsiderate, right? So even though I myself would not share things like Mora and Geo shared on social media, um, I still see the value of the cynics, of the people who are rude, right? That philosophy doesn't always have to be polite or kind, right? Sometimes it can be pretty challenging and in your face, punk rock, right? So I see where the AAPU is going, but I also see the importance of protecting people who sort of go too far. So what's the practical proposal to protect academic freedom? It's tenure, right? And it basically means that Cephalus just can't fire Socrates. There has to be due process. You have to go through academic procedures. There have to be ways for the department and then the provost to vote on the case, and there has to be an appeals committee. And at no point can the trustees weigh in. I mean, that's the amazing thing about tenure. And I was saying in the first lecture, I've written a lot of articles about current events. Some of them have waded into controversies because I have tenure. Nobody even bothers to try to get me fired. I mean, clearly, if I cross certain lines, that could be in jeopardy. But as long as I write articles and publish them in good places, if I publish an op-ed in the Washington Post, nobody's going to try to get me fired at USA Today or Boston Globe or these other places where I try to publish and have published. Like, tenure protects faculty. So this is the last slide, and here's the question sort of I want to talk with people. Do you think academic freedom should only protect things said in a scholar's method and a scholar's spirit, right? And here's an article that just came out about in the New York Times about Maura Finkelstein. It came out after the first lecture, right? It's in the news right now, is that she said something pretty inflammatory on social media, or technically she retweeted an Instagram post that was pretty polemical. Like, what do you think? Should academic freedom protect her, or do you think if you sort of are not scholarly enough, you've lost the terms of academic freedom? So now it's really my honor to have a conversation with Dr. Stephen Miles. He is a professor emeritus of music at New College of Florida. He was the provost and vice president for academic affairs from 2011 to 2017. He is the founding director of New Music, New College, which for 24 years served as a laboratory for interdisciplinary research and performance of contemporary music. I read about him lots in Alumni Magazine, so I'm really excited to talk with him. And if you have a question, please type in a question and answers. That's my lecture. I look forward to the conversation. Hey, Stephen, how are you?
Very good. Thanks. Great to be here, Nick.
Great. What do you think, Steve? Do you think academic freedom should protect professors who say crazy things in public?
Well, particularly with regard to the article about Laura Finkelstein, the article makes it clear that there's a context in which this controversy emerged. And part of the controversy was the somewhat weak financial status of the college. All right. In other words, that they weren't rolling in money, that that they needed all the students that they could get, and the threat of Jewish high schools to be told you cannot go here. This was a threat to them economically. So I think, one issue is, and you've already kind of alluded to it, saying things is one thing. Where you say them is another. And social media is almost designed to generate a lot of heat. So you were talking about how you have things that you want to say, but you make this distinction, right? You discriminate between this is what I want to say, but I think I'm going to hold on to that. So it's that the act of discrimination there is also it's respecting or recognizing that the platforms for speech are different and have different rules. And in one sense, social media is where nuance and the philosopher's spirit perhaps is hardest to convey.
Yeah, well, I mean, the beauty of social media, and maybe I don't need to convince anybody who is ever on social media, is that I've sometimes tweeted to very powerful people who respond.
Yes, right.
Right? I mean, that's the amazing thing. Like you never know. Maybe Elon Musk will reply. Maybe JD Vance will reply. Back in the good old days, Trump would reply to accounts with 100 alt-right followers. Like, you know what I mean? That's the beauty of it. And um, I Socrates used to go down to the agora, the marketplace, and he would duke it out with people. And so, I mean, that's kind of what I do a little bit, right? Is that I go into the marketplace of ideas and try to duke it out, right? I mean, I'm willing to roll up my sleeves and say, it's one thing for me to be in a classroom where I'm the boss, right? And but it's not a fair fight, right? But then you go into the agora, and all of a sudden people are throwing sand in your eyes and kicking you in the where they're not supposed to kick you and trying to gouge you in the eye. So you're like, wait a minute, what about the scholarly rules? Like,
Well, again, we're framing this as a philosophical question,
yeah,
right? In one sense, but again, the circumstances are very, very important. It's one thing with Laura Finkelstein makes a post something, but what about when Noam Chomsky takes a position? Okay, now Noam Chomsky, people have called for him to be fired for things that he has said about Israel specifically.
yeah.
Um, but he's Noam Chomsky. So, so his speech is actually valued in a certain sense and protected to a greater degree than, say, Laura Finkelstein's speech, in part because of the context, in part because of, well, the circumstances surrounding it. So, yes, freedom of speech, the right to be able to say things without being fired for it, without being punished for it, should be upheld. But I think what you've been getting at indirectly is that there are circumstances that you need to factor in that are important in the execution of that.
Right. No, I mean, if there's a through line through a lot of my work, it's trying to protect this beautiful thing of higher education. And one of the things that's beautiful about it is it's sort of the synthesis of the Enlightenment and Romanticism. So you've got the Enlightenment and you've got reason and you've got philosophy and economics, but then you have Romanticism and you have art and music and plays and
Mhm.
wonderful parties. I mean, one of the best parts of academia are these Epicurean garden parties where you drink wine with friends and listen to music and and talk ideas. I mean, I love that stuff, right? And so um, for me, like we academics need to get a little bit smarter about sort of protecting the fort because it's a beautiful thing that we so on one part of defending the fort is protecting academic freedom. But if you look at other things I've written and said and what I do is I would say, we need to be a little bit smarter about antagonizing people for the wrong reasons.
Sure, sure. I wonder if we could go back to one of the first slides. You don't have to bring the slide up, but just the content. You began by talking about the tenure has been under attack, and you go back and you show, starting in the late 1980s, that the number of positions, the percentage of positions that are tenured has declined. The percentage of positions that are on contract or part-time has dramatically increased. Can you talk about why you think that developed? Why did that change occur? And is it any way connected to these larger questions about academic freedom?
So there's a valid reason and there's an invalid reason, and so they combine, right? So
Mhm.
the valid reason is that sometimes universities hire philosophers or professors of practice.
Right.
So you might say we want a journalist who's also a working journalist to come in and teach journalism. We want somebody who works in advertising to come in and teach advertising. So I had an uncle who worked with computers and he would teach computer science at the local community college, right? And he didn't want tenure. He had a perfectly fine job, but he'd like to be with young people and talk about ideas. So the fact that he didn't have tenure or tenure track, that's not a scandal per se. But on the other hand, it's money, right? It's that
Okay.
at a school like Fordham, you're if you offer somebody a tenure track job, I mean, you're on the hook for millions,
Yes.
millions of dollars that if the market changes, you're going to have that professor there for a long time. I mean, I was just reading that or social media, a friend posted that University of Washington is creating like 100 tenure track jobs in artificial intelligence, AI. And you're thinking, oh no, you know what I mean? Like in 2 decades, what's going to happen? Are we still going to need all those professors? Was that so
Mm.
me who's not in computer science is saying this is not a good decision. Supposedly the provost is just barging ahead on his own without consulting faculty. And you just say, oh no, that's um, so it's a problem. And the fact is that we were communicating about this the other day about, Florida is they're trying to look for ways to weaken tenure with post tenure review. So
Right.
right before this afternoon, I was reading the law and it's performance expectations about productivity and I think teaching evaluations and maybe one or two other things. So it didn't like trip the wire for me as being like a clear violation of
Mhm.
academic freedom, but sometimes the law has all sorts of tricks that you don't
Sure.
see.
Sure.
So I don't want to exonerate the Florida legislature, but I think definitely public systems, including in Ohio, and I'll talk about that next lecture, they're looking for ways to weaken tenure. And yeah.
Well, I just wanted to interject maybe with some history within Florida. You're probably familiar with in the late 50s, we had our own version of the McCarthyite witch hunts, the Johns Committee in the Senate. Basically, this was a committee looking for communists and homosexuals in the academy. They were trying to root them out. People's lives were ruined. And
Yeah.
and then and in light of that, the state established the Board of Regents.
Hmm.
So this was a governing body for the university system intended to serve as a buffer between the politics and the academy. It was basically an effort to affirm academic freedom and to keep the politicians from messing with it.
Hmm.
But then when you go into 1999, 2000, Jeb Bush is the governor. He has his eye on the White House. He doesn't eventually go there, but that's what he wants. He would be regarded today as a rhino.
Yeah.
Jeb Bush it would be belonging to a Republican Party that apparently doesn't even exist anymore.
Yeah.
But what he did is he wanted the Board of Regents to abolish tenure. And when they refused to do that, at his behest, the state legislature eliminated the Board of Regents, dissolved the Board of Regents.
Wow.
And it required Bob Graham, Senator Bob Graham, and others to have a amendment, Amendment 11, that was on the ballot, to establish the Florida Board of Governors, to essentially say, no, you must have this protection between the politics and the academy. But the problem with it, though, is that even though it allowed for greater faculty participation, student participation, every member of the Board of Governors is appointed by the governor of Florida.
Hmm.
So over time, the Board of Governors reflects, I mean, particularly in the state of Florida, where we've had Republican governors for so many years, it, instead of being the place that is the buffer, the protection against political pressure, now
Hmm.
it is in fact one of the instruments of that pressure. Uh,
Yeah.
so so when we think about what's going on with Ron DeSantis, and then of course looking to the states like Indiana and Texas that have instituted similar kinds of laws, the Stop Woke Act that got through the SB 266, which effectively eliminates tenure. It doesn't say that's what it's doing, but it gives the president of the university a final decision in all hiring and firing, and faculty have no appeal to outside arbitration.
Hmm.
What they've done is they've said, we don't have to abolish tenure. We don't have to come out and say that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
But we are, in fact, so greatly weakening the protections of tenure that it effectively eliminates it.
Yeah. Um, well, that's too bad. Do you mind if I answer some of these
Yeah,
questions?
absolutely.
We can do it together. So Rebecca Raphael writes, do you think that there should be any limits in which academics should remain as a function of academic freedom? I don't mean mere politeness or manner, but speech that is unevidenced, abusive, or inflammatory or of violence. So here's how I would answer that. If you're out in the world, I would say the First Amendment applies to you, right? So
Mhm.
you're not allowed to, there's certain things you're not allowed to do out in the world. You're not allowed to say things that are going to lead immediately to a fight, or you're not allowed to share, somebody's personal address and coordinate violence, right? There are all sorts of things like that. I'll focus a little bit on the Maura Finkelstein case because I've been reading the AAU report about it, and it's like 30 some pages. And then I've read the letter from the Biden administration. I posted on social media. It was the Trump administration, but it was the Biden administration, correction, right? The Office of Civil Rights, they wrote a long thing. And the thing is that, the tweet said, do not cower to Zionists. Do not make them feel safe in your space. So the fact is, according to the AAUP, what needs to happen is there has to be an investigation looking at Maura Finkelstein's entire record and seeing, is she in fact doing that in the classroom?
Mhm.
So if she is in fact, you know, intimidating certain students, like, I mean, I don't think Zionism is a protected class. I think that there's a weird movement trying to protect a political ideology and try to say it's the same as race or nation or things you can't control. Like you can't control whether you're a Zionist or not. So I'm very wary of the weaponization of Title VI.
Mhm.
Um, I'm not commenting about Zionism, right? This is not my talk. It's just for academic freedom purposes. We need to be able to debate Zionism in higher education. And if you don't allow that, then you're not going to allow discussions about Hindutva or pan-Slavism or no, we can't go down that route. We need to be able to discuss these things. Again, I'm not taking a position in this lecture. It's not the point of this lecture. But if Professor Finkelstein was in fact making students at Muhlenberg College, if she was penalizing them with grades, certainly if she was ever physically intimidating them, that's clearly unacceptable. But even if she was making an uncomfortable environment for certain students, not even a protected class, just certain students, then, she could, you know, if the faculty board decided that she was not fit for classroom, then, she could have been fired. So that's the fine line that I'm trying to walk. That, really the AAUP is saying that the problem is she got fired without due process. They weren't trying to race to the end of the investigation and say that she's exonerated. They weren't making that argument. They're trying to be careful, right? Hopefully I was able to present that answer with enough care. Um, All right, maybe I'll go down to the next one from Claire Katz. We often hear that academic freedom is limited to teaching in one's area. Chemistry teacher teaches chemistry and should not be talking about politics. How expansive is academic freedom in the classroom? Where is the line in the classroom? That's one thing the AAUP says is that professors should stay on topic. Right? If you're a chemistry professor, you're not allowed to turn it into an art history class or an English profess class, and the university can investigate. And if you're not teaching your subject matter, you're not doing your job. And I don't think anybody would defend academic freedom of somebody teaching the wrong subject matter in the class that they were assigned. So, but I think you still have to sort of go through the faculty to make sure that the faculty decide, that the trustees don't decide. Because if you let the trustees decide, you're opening the door to punishing faculty. Um, Here's where I stand. I mean, I agree with the 1915 document. Professors are human beings. We've got thoughts. We've got thoughts about things. Sometimes a student asks me point blank, Professor Tampio, what do you think? And I just say, part of the deal with being philosophy, whatever academic department is, if somebody asks you a question, you can give a good answer or a good enough answer, you give it your best shot. So, I think that we should be tolerant of professors bringing their politics into the classroom. I mean, if they're systematically penalizing students because of grades, because of partisanship, then you can get a thing, and that's a problem. I was reading. I'm Stephen was
Well, you're reading my face that I
yeah,
read.
yeah, I know, I'm reading your face, but
Yeah,
I also read
no,
your, yeah,
yeah. So I think first of all, there's the question about governance. Okay, the idea that faculty should be judging other faculty, should be investigating other faculty, or should be in charge of what happens in the academic program.
yeah,
That idea of faculty governance, which is very much what the 1915 Declaration is about, that we are professionals, that we have these, that we maintain standards, etc. And you're saying that, okay, so someone might make an errant comment or go off topic or something. That's one thing. If they now present a course where it seems like they are unqualified to do that, then we have a right as faculty, as colleagues, to say, okay, this doesn't fly. But faculty governance, the principle that's involved with the 1915 Declaration, that's not how things are operating and haven't been operating in universities for quite some time. The
mhm,
faculty want faculty governance, but in fact, it's shared governance, right? Where faculty acknowledge that there are the administration acknowledges that in all matters that are academic, the faculty should be in charge. Then the faculty say, but there are administrative issues over which we grant, we recognize the administration's authority. But what's happening now is that even shared governance is being eliminated by, again, in Florida. What we're seeing is that, for example, with the Stop Woke Act, getting back to maybe this question,
mhm,
the Stop Woke Act makes it that you are bound by statute not to teach certain concepts of race,
yeah,
not to make any student feel guilty for something having to do with history, right? So about slavery, etc. Now, that the statute allows for students to video record professors without their permission,
right.
and then when they believe that this is against statute, and to give that to administrators. The students then having this ability to take the faculty to task with administrators. This is a severe erosion over if what the 1915 document really creates is kind of the sanctity of the classroom.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, actually, the 1915 document says like you're not allowed to take statements out of the class and bring them into the public, right?
Right,
And so when I teach authors, I teach plenty of authors I disagree with, but I say if I'm going to do it, I'm going to give them a fair shot. And so
right.
today I'm going to be a Rawlsian liberal. Next week, I'll be a Straussian conservative. The week after that, I'll be and it's so yeah, no, I mean, if you recording is clear violation of academic freedom. Maybe I could reply to Margaret McLaren's question here about whether academic freedom only goes to what's within your disciplinary purview. So a chemistry professor, if they do pro-Palestinian statements. So I guess one thing I'd say is First Amendment should apply outside of the academy. Professors should have just the same rights as anybody else on social media. I guess just what I would tell chemistry professors who are talking about pro-Palestinian things is a lot of us go outside of our zone. A lot of us talk about things for which we have not been trained. The fact is that I think that professors we're just advanced students, right? So I'm very wary of like the notion of experts. I wrote a whole article about like, being wary of expertise and experts. I don't think they're experts. I think they're more advanced students who are always learning things. I guess that's what I would tell that chemistry professor is, try to be careful about how you present your things, right? Somebody like Max Weber and the vocation of science, science as a vocation, he says professors should never talk about politics. I don't agree with that. We're human. We're allowed to talk about things. But still try to follow the scholarly spirit and the scholarly method, and try to. I don't know. I don't know if that's a great answer. I mean, I don't think you should be fired for a pro-Palestinian tweet or pro-Israeli tweet. But just firing's the extreme, right? We can have a lot of conversations before we get to firing, right? And so just sort of ethical or professional or collegial or civic, we'll just say, listen, there are better or worse ways, right? So one of my rules is I don't do personal insults on social media. I never use the formulation so and so is a blank. Right, I'm a human. I want to say things like, this person's a jerk, but like, I stop myself. I say, listen, that's not going to advance the conversation, Nick. Like, try to elevate the conversation. So, again, I mean, I hope I'm getting roundabout to your answer. You shouldn't be fired. But I still would tell the professor, there are better and worse ways to do it and try to do it in the better ways.
Could I interject something here too?
Sure.
In terms of music,
Yeah.
which can be approached in a very technical way. And there are conservatories of music. People study basically music all the time. But one of the developments within music scholarship certainly since the 80s has been gradually finding the tools to allow us to talk about the social context in which music is created and which is composed.
Mhm.
That to talk about music as if, the idea of autonomous music, the idea that this is music that refers to nothing but itself, that that notion has been interrogated rather thoroughly in the sense that now we recognize, okay, it's in a complex set of relationships with this culture, with the society. It's difficult now to teach music, the music of the past or music of the present, without talking about things that are non-musical. All right, philosophy as it comes to bear on it, economics, social theory. Now, someone might view that as steering away, as veering from the point. But my point here is that the practice within the academy by scholars whose work is peer reviewed, there has been we've gained the tools to be able to interrogate music's social meanings in ways that weren't doing it 50 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, here's the balancing act, and I mean, I'll just reply to the essay you shared with me this afternoon, Steve, or maybe yesterday. It's that, we academics need to be prudent. We need to be far-sighted. We need to realize that it's a golden goose. It's just, academic freedom is a beautiful thing.
Mhm.
And yet, we have to negotiate the town and gown issues.
Yeah.
And, I think what you were doing with having the concerts for the community, even challenging concerts, but inviting the community, I mean, that matters. Sports, sports can be okay, theater can be okay. When I was at New College, we had the Renaissance Fair, and we brought everybody on campus and like, one of my professors, like, what are we doing on campus? Having, jousting on campus. But just, it's the thing is that we have to be smart about building legitimacy. And, if you build a lot of goodwill and you get a lot of people wearing the sweatshirts and you get a lot of people, hoping their kids can get into, IU Bloomington or UNC Chapel Hill or New College of Florida or wherever. And then, once you build up that goodwill, then it's going to be a little bit easier to ride the storm when a professor tweets something, a little bit maybe,
That's right.
and but I think that's that's my view. We need to protect, we need to be smart. We need to protect academic freedom, and we also need to sort of build the fort for when the attack comes, we're ready for it.
Mhm. Good note there, I think, from Mary. The college also hosted global conferences in medieval and Renaissance studies.
Oh, is that right? Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right. That's
yeah.
right. Yeah, so maybe I want to keep it to about an hour, but I'd like to respond to Rebecca's question, and Stephen, you could answer it too. Do either of you have advice for those of us in public systems where state legislatures are undermining academic freedom, shared governance, and all the good things? So, Rebecca, sometimes the good guys lose, and sometimes the renaissance ends, and that I nothing I can say is foolproof. If anybody had figured out foolproof that we want to be having this conversation. But I guess just the argument that I would keep relying on is, if you want the good things that come from universities, you're going to have a high threshold of putting up with things you don't like.
Mhm.
Right. So, you can fire somebody for a stupid or ill-advised tweet. You can fire them and get them gone, and you can flex your muscles. But then you're going to take a really big reputational hit. And now all of a sudden the word's going to go out. Listen, if you've got a job and you've got a choice between going to the north or the south for a tenure track job, you're going to want to go to the north, or you're going to, if a state, fire, it outlaws gay marriage or something like that, you're basically announcing that people who want to exercise gay marriage, right to gay marriage, are going to go north. And so what you have to say is, you say, listen, do you want us to compete with the other good state public education systems? Well, then you're going to have to put up with certain things that you don't necessarily like, right? So like I'm thinking about Indiana University. I got my master's degree there, and the way that IU used to work is that the alumni used to vote for a trustee, and the trustee was a pain in the butt in the president's side. So the president of Indiana University and the state legislature, the governor, basically got rid of that position. Now all the trustees are appointed by the governor. And you're like, all right, well, the governor won that round. He won that move. He got rid of a thorn in the side. The president of IU won. But here's the deal. If you really start antagonizing faculty, that's going to hurt Indiana University. And you got to ask the politicians, do you want IU to be a great school or not? Do you want it to be a world-class university or not? Do you want people from all around the world to want to come and study business and dance and art history and politics and economics and sexuality, right? The Kinsey Institute. Like, if you want all these good things, you're going to have to like put up with a certain amount of freedom. I hope that argument works.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Well, I'm just thinking about how to respond to that question. Yeah, in public systems now. And I think one thing that you said, Nick, I'll just underscore, is that we are in a terrible moment. Okay, and so this is not an easy time to be in the academy in a red state, or in a state where higher ed is under threat. Um, but I do think that the moment requires that we think contextually, meaning this is not just an issue with universities, it's a question of illiberal democracy. I mean,
Yeah.
if we're only thinking about how this affects us as faculty, I mean, yes, we need to be mindful of that. Yes, we need to find our friends in
Right.
power. All that's true. But what we're experiencing now in the academy is just one piece, one part of the rejection of liberal democracy and the creation of an illiberal democracy, whether you have Hungary or Russia, etc. And that's what we've been living with in Florida for the past several years, and what Trump is trying to take forward. So, it's a hard time to be an academic but I do think we have to think about the larger issues that transcend the academy.
Absolutely. I am friends with the former president of Fordham University, Father McShane, and he used to say
Mm.
higher education is always in emergency mode. I mean, I don't want to
True,
minimize the
true. No,
current
but that's a
dangers.
really good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't want to minimize the current dangers, but like, we gotta breathe, go for walks, exercise, come back to fight another day. So listen, I'm gonna wrap up today's lecture. In 1 week, I'm going to take the historical material and really just try to focus on the present. I want to talk about Harvard University. I want to talk about Ohio state education system. We could talk more about the Muhlenberg College and the Mora Finkelstein case. There's a lot more issues there to discuss. So thank you for listening to the second lecture, and I hope to see you all next week.